Hi, and welcome at long last to the Inventive Marketing Club number 20. And today we're going to be looking at blog content review. And that's why I've got a colleague, Catherine, who I'll introduce in a minute, along with me to help talk about this. Sorry for being late. I have no idea what happened. Demio was being awkward, wouldn't let us in, said, I had poor internet. That's not the case. Mine's very good. Hopefully it won't drop. Catherine's going to be our little sort of mining bird, and you tell me if you can't hear anything. We might have to stop and redo this another day, but hopefully it'll work. So really, we're looking at a blog content review, and we're going to be talking about how we went through one with a client of ours, Communion Architects, and what the reason was for doing it. So just a little bit about me for those of you who are new. So I'm Ben Kinnaird. I've worked with over 500 businesses now since 2009 when we started Rather Inventive in a variety of different things: marketing strategy, web development, video, data. I get involved in lots of different things. We've got lots, if you haven't looked at them, we've got lots of previous webinars. I think this is the 20th, so we've got 19 other ones, a variety of different subjects, trying to experiment with different ideas at the moment as well. We've also got lots of resources online, and you can listen to all of these as a podcast version as well. I mean, some won't necessarily work well like that because they're much more visual, but it's certainly there for you to listen to while you're walking the dog or doing the dishes. If you can't find any of this and you need to know where it is, just email me, support@ratherinventive.com. So say hello to Catherine. Do you want to just introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Catherine Every. I run a business called Pippin Copywriting. I'm a freelance B2B copywriter. So I work with tech businesses and businesses that typically are fantastic at what they do and not so great about telling people about it. So they get me on board to help them express their ideas more clearly. I write all sorts of stuff. So websites, blogs, white papers, reports, leaflets, letters, anything that needs to sell to your customer base to a greater or lesser extent. I was looking back at my files this morning. I think I've been working with Ben, or kind of known Ben, for probably getting on for 10 years.
Really?
I know. Yeah. And I've been working with Alex and Ben with Communion for about 7 years. So yeah.
Do you remember? I was trying to think. How did we get to know each other?
I think I sent you a cold email.
Really? So they do work.
They do. It must have been just as you were setting up Rather Inventive, and you said, "Yeah, actually, that could be quite helpful to have a copywriter. Let's have a chat." So
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not something I mean, I know how important copywriting is. It's invaluable, and it's not something I want to get involved in at all. I mean, I'm happy to review a short title or something like that, or maybe even just give my opinion on something. But as for writing copy, it's hard. I mean, that's one of the reasons I do this, because I don't have to write anything. And it is, I was actually talking to someone else, one of our members, Heidi Chamberlain-Jones, and we were talking about how, and you probably find this, Catherine, that how some people, there's different people who value copywriting in different ways. And so, there are some people with whom they just say, well, it's just writing, isn't it? I mean, I can tap away at the computer and make stuff. Yes, of course you can. It's like I can ramble into this microphone and make noise. Hopefully what a copywriter is trying to do is not only do that work for you, but that's like the end result, putting the letters on the page. It's using all of the knowledge of trying to communicate a message, or maybe trying to influence an action, if that's possible, as well as doing research, maybe making sure it's technically spelled correctly, and as well as maybe even linking in with some SEO elements.
Yeah, that's really right.
And I think it's testament to what we're going to talk through here. I mean, yes, I mean, a lot of what you do is the copywriting element of it, but this is a bit more deeper than that. This is really almost a technical look at the copywriting, where your skills are invaluable, but you need to do more than just write copy. It's a lot more about assessing the situation. Yeah, so
absolutely.
It is absolutely invaluable. Right, so let's have a look. Now, this is like the last one, a bit more of a conversation. We're going to go through our steps, really, using the case study of Communion Architects as a sort of springboard for talking about this. But it's actually a process I've done with lots of different clients, and including our own website. And it's quite a fun process, although it does take some time. So basically, what is a blog review, and what's the point? Because it takes quite a time, and it's quite a big investment. And really for me, it's about having a look at the content that has been written for your website, particularly if you've got quite an established website. So you've been writing content for a number of years. Maybe you've had different people writing it. Maybe the owner started, then they had one copywriter, maybe another copywriter. And so maybe the tone of voice might be different between them. Maybe some of the articles just aren't very good. They're not relevant anymore. I mean, there's lots of reasons. I was looking at it particularly from a search engine optimization point of view. So I wanted to make sure that where possible, the majority of the content on the site was doing a job, whether that be bringing people in from externally, allowing people to link to great content and find great content through search engines, or be part of the sales process, be something that Alex can use when he's talking to people, and to demonstrate his credibility and capability on what he can do. So really, I think essentially it's just looking at it from many levels, but from my point of view, removing thin content, stuff that just isn't really adding any value, maybe consolidating that stuff together with the aim to just focus on the quality and improve search engine visibility, ranking where possible, but ultimately more traffic in, more leads. That's the simple equation here. So if we can get more people coming in, we can get more people filling out the contact form, getting in touch with Alex or his associates, and new business. That's ultimately what we're doing here. Now I know Communion Architects. Were you working with them from the beginning, Catherine? On the copy?
I don't think so. I think you put me in touch with Alex when you said I think you could be really helpful here. So yeah, I think relatively early, but certainly not straight away.
I think it was because we took over an existing website that his brother had made and worked on, sort of to get him started. And then it really is part of what I do. Blog posting and good writing on the web is invaluable. So he certainly has content. I looked back at the audit. He's got content from the last 8 years or so. Yeah. So it certainly has been that amount of content, and there's a lot of posts on there, some of which are quite valuable in search. You know, they've got a lot of traffic coming through, but they could be improved. So it's basically just taking a step back from that viewpoint. What about from your point of view? How did I convey that to you, Catherine, in terms of the importance of doing this? What was your takeaway from doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was exactly that. It was improving what was out there and taking stock, saying actually, what is it on? What have we blogged about in the past 8 years? I mean, in lots of cases, Alex is thinking had evolved, so he'd kind of put a post sort of 6-7 years ago, and his thinking had changed, and we'd done a new post. So there were the kind of 2 posts that said slightly different things in different ways. And it was just an opportunity for Alex wants to make sure that everything on his website is really high quality and is really useful for people. So it was just applying that thinking to the blogs to make sure every single blog was something useful and valuable and worth your time reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's have a look. This is just a very quick screen grab of the blog itself. It doesn't show the depth of the articles, really. There's a lot of them. And in fact, we went through 2 revisions of how the blog looks. One initially when the whole design changed about maybe 3 years ago. And then another bit more recently this year. I think it was this year. It's difficult with this year because everything's flowing together, but maybe it was last year actually, just after you'd done your work, quite potentially, where there was so much content that not only did the review sort of go through and highlight what was there, but also the fact that we needed to bring some of that to the surface. So actually we increased the number of categories shown on the front page here. So there's quite a bit of depth, and I think there are more categories than that, but it basically helped refine those categories down, and then also picking out key articles that we want people to read. We've labeled them as popular. I mean, that's not strictly true, but they are popular, but they're manually picked by us in terms of the ones we want people to look at. But there's lots of articles in each of those different sections, so it's quite a big undertaking in terms of reviewing that. So I'm just going to talk through sort of my process, the technical side of it, how I gather the data together, then I'll hand over to Catherine, who will talk about sort of the more creative side of it. So collecting the data was in some ways quite straightforward. I mean, collecting data is not difficult. It's very easy to get data from lots of different places. The difficulty is trying to mash that together in a way that becomes useful to you. So I'll just try and explain my process here. Some of it gets a little bit technical, so I'm not expecting you necessarily to do it, but it might help if you understand that process and you can take from it what you will. So I initially just wanted to look at the last 2 years. So rather than looking at all sort of data, and by data I mean Google Analytics, stats, visitors, looking at search traffic on Google itself. I only wanted to look at data over the last 2-year period. So I've got, so we weren't working with too much. And we're looking at information that's relevant as well. Because in some ways, it might be worth looking to see whether an article was popular 80 years ago, but it's not popular now. And that's what we need to know. So trying to restrict that time period was quite important. And I thought 2 years was fair. I also wrote a script to export all of the articles from WordPress. So it's basically a little PHP script. We run it on the site and it gives us a little spreadsheet file with all of the WordPress posts, the category they're in, the date they were written, I think the author as well, all the sort of key information we need to know to look at all the posts. And importantly, we were only looking at blog posts, not the pages. The pages kind of go through a separate process really, and we don't tend to have so many of them. They tend to be more focused, whereas the blog posts can grow and grow as the more you write over time. And then the next step was, well, I had these spreadsheets. I had the Google Analytics data for the last 2 years. I had as much Google Search Console data as I could get. I don't think I could get 2 years worth. And then I had all of the articles from WordPress that were written since the very beginning. So since whenever it was, I think that we'll see a date in a minute. And I needed to marry those up together. So I needed to have a spreadsheet that not only showed all the different URLs for the posts, but also showed the data against each one, so we could determine how they worked. And basically, the key thing I wanted to do is find the low performing ones and then review the ones that are getting a lot of traffic and seeing if they can be improved, and then basically see if there's any consolidation, merging, and other stuff that we can do. So let's have a look at the initial spreadsheet. So this is the merged spreadsheet once I'd finished. And I'll just walk you through it. It's just, we use Google Sheets. Oh, forgive me. We're having I don't know if you can hear it. We're having a fence put in. So there's a little bit of drilling going on. Hopefully you can forgive that. So basically, we use Google Sheets because it allows me to share the sheet with everyone else, and the data is live. So I can put information in there. Catherine's going to see it updated straight away. And I think Communion was one of the first companies I did this with. So there was a bit more playing around with the data until we got it right. So on the left, you can see the URL. So that relates back to the WordPress blog post, the date it was actually created. And that gives us an idea about, obviously it tells us its age, but it gives us an idea about relevance there. The exact title used in there. And then its category. So it's the category that Catherine had put it in. That's the primary category. Often blog posts in WordPress can have multiple categories, but we just only want to look at the primary one here. And then moving along in columns, we've got a mashup of Google Analytics and Google Search Console data. So the first one, page views, that's the number of page views or number of times that page has been viewed over the search period, which was 2 years. And that's the total number of views. It doesn't necessarily say how many individual people have looked at it. So that's where the next column comes in, and that's users. So that's the number of unique visitors that have seen that page over the last 2 year period that we checked that out. And then there's a pages per session number, which actually I don't think we used in the end, but it gave an idea about how valuable that page was in generating more page views. Because actually something I didn't mention is these are landing pages. So it's looking at those visits where that was the landing page, which was particularly important. So that pages per session was important to know that does that blog post drive people to look at more pages on the site, or does it end there? It's not a problem if it ends there. It just might be another signal to look at. Going on, we've got Google Search Console impressions or GSC impressions. So that's the number of times that post came up in search. And then we've got the number of click-throughs. So we've got a number of times it shows up in search, and then the number of clicks through to that particular post. Hello again,
sorry,
Catherine.
I'm going to turn my camera off. The internet just dropped completely, but I'm going to turn my camera off and see if that.
Oh, well, I see you in a second. So we've got there the number of people who saw it on Google or it appeared on Google in Google search, number of people who click through, then the number of people who actually saw it as a landing page. And obviously those numbers are going to be different because people jump in from different places. And so that's useful data in order to determine, is this blog post still popular? Now on the next screen, and I've got the one of the key things we're looking at, where this big red arrow is pointing to, is the Google Search Console impressions. And obviously this particular page at the top, doing very well, had a high number of impressions. Now, in case you wonder, I have removed the rest of the data. While Alex was happy to share it, I'd rather not sort of give away all the stats on his website, so I've blurred out a lot of it there for you, but it just gives you an example that, you know, he has some incredibly sort of popular pages on the site. And then looking down the bottom to, I think this was the last one on the list, and just showing that some of the articles, while they may have been good at the time, just aren't good now. It's you can see this one's actually getting 4 impressions in search over the last 2 years and no click-throughs. It doesn't necessarily mean that that blog post isn't useful. It just means that we've got to consider it as potentially one to remove. We can also see that it just really isn't getting a lot of visits. You know, it's had 6 unique people look at it over the last 2 years, and they haven't driven any other pages. We can see the pages possession is just 1, which means people have looked at that page and nothing else. So it's a good example of maybe one page that can be trimmed out. It just might not have be relevant for anyone anymore. So how did I get all that data together? Well, it took a little bit of time initially because we're figuring things out in terms of where the data comes from. But as I mentioned, the WordPress posts came from a little script I wrote, which just took all of the blog posts, made a little CSV file, like a little spreadsheet file, and then I could download that and then pop it into Google Sheets. So that gave me my baseline data of all of the different posts. But then I needed to match that up with Google Search Console and Google Analytics data. So what you would need to do that, so and do it in a sane way, and so you're not having to keep going and fetching data automatically, manually, and then putting it in and matching it up yourself, which is not a job I'd want to do. Is in Google Sheets you can get these little add-ons, and so this is the Google Search Console add-on. It's called Search Analytics for Sheets. And what it enables you to do once you've added it, and you can add these by, if you use Google Sheets, you can go to the add-ons tab and you can go and look through a directory and find them in there. And so this one allows you to pick the domain. So I pick the domain Communion Architects because that's the one I'm looking at. Now you have to have that domain connected in Google Search Console. If you don't know how to do that, we've got a whole session on going through Google Search Console from verifying all the way through. But once you've got it in there, then you can connect to it using this add-on, put in the date range that I want, and then pick the key information, how I want things to group by. So I want it to show the page because I need to match that up. And then I also want to it pulls through automatically the number of clicks, impressions, the click-through rate, and the average for that time period search position. So where on average appears in search. It's not going to give you the current search position right now, and we weren't really interested in that for this particular purpose anyway. So that's the first thing, is to create a new spreadsheet in your Google Sheet and set up this add-on, and then it will pull all that data into the sheet for you, so you don't have to go and export it from Google Search Console, which I used to do, and you can't actually do now. As far as I can see, you can't directly export from Google Search Console. So this was one of the ways of doing that into somewhere which was useful for us. So that's the first thing. I've got my Google Search Console data. So that is everything about what's happening on Google Search itself. And then next, I wanted to look at everything that's happening on the website, so the number of page views and unique visits. So this is where we need another add-on, and I can't remember what this one's called. I think it's just called Google Analytics add-on. And this works in a very similar but a different way because it's made by someone else. These aren't from Google directly. Again, you can get this little side panel that pops up where you can give it a name, pick the account, particular property, and then what data you want out from it, and then you can create a report. When you do that, what it does is it creates 2 sheets. So one is the sheet for configuration, so that's called configuration options here, and then the other one, which you can see below, is where the actual data is held. And what's nice about the configuration options is actually once you've put it in, you can go and tweak things, like you can go and tweak the start and end dates. And then you can put the number of limits. So if you want to limit the amount of data coming back, you can do that. And you can play with things that way. Once you've done that, you can just go up to the add-ins, Google Analytics, run report, and actually that report stays active. So it will just pull in that new data for you. It's actually really useful if you want to create your own sort of dynamic dashboard. So now we've got lots of different sheets within our Google Sheet, lots of different tabs in our Google Sheet with all that data on, and we need to marry it together. Now, this is the most difficult bit, because what we don't want to do is go manually adding it up, having to scroll down, find the landing page, copy the number of page views and paste it in. That's just not a job you want to do once, but also if you need to refresh that data, you're going to have to do it again. So you need to find an automatic way of doing this. And I don't think I used it for this particular spreadsheet, but I came across a really good equation called SUM-IF in Google Sheets, which allows you to look at one cell, one bit of information, and match it up and say, if you can find that exact cell in this column of information over here, then do something with it, then sum up the totals. So I'm going to try and explain this. I don't do a lot of equations, so it took my head a little while to wrap around it. You may pick it up much more quickly. I've tried to sort of highlight in colors here how it works. I mean, if we're working on a project together, I'm happy to sort of set this spreadsheet up, and then you can use it. Personally, once it's done, you don't need to touch it. It's just a means to an end. But it might be useful if you're thinking about mashing up data for different purposes. So let me try and explain. So basically, the equation goes in very much like Excel. You put equals at the beginning, then you type SUM-IF, and then it's got these three sections. The first section, the bit in red, is what you are what you're comparing against. So I've basically put in there, the first part is the Google Search Console. So it's looking in the Google Search Console tab. And we basically want to look everywhere from record or cell A2 all the way through to the end of that. And that's our, I don't know what they call it, but that's basically where we're looking. That's our sort of lookup field area. And then in the next section, the bit in green, this is what we are looking for. So we want to look for, in the red section, this bit of text, which is in the green section, and that refers to the URL from WordPress. So basically, we're going to say, I want to find get planning permission barn conversion in the Google Search Console, but they're in different orders. We don't know where it is in that list, so it's got to run through and have a look. While it's doing that, for every single entry it does find, this is where the purple bit comes in, we then look at the number of impressions, and we then match up and sum all of the impressions that match the URL together. Now, hopefully that makes sense to you, but basically speaking, all it's doing is saying, I want to look at all the impressions where the Google Search Console URLs match this particular blog URL in any of these rows. It sounds more complex than it is, but actually it makes a lot of sense. And once you copy that in, you just copy and paste it down the all of the rows, and it's going to do all of the summation for you. You don't need to do any other work. And if you update the Google Search Console data because you're changing the range or anything like that, you don't need to do any extra work. It's done for you. And then you can obviously use a similar equation for the clicks, the impressions, and page views as well. So it requires a little bit of change, but it makes your job a lot easier. And obviously, this isn't a general dashboard we're going to use all the time. This is just something that's set up for a specific purpose, but we need it to be dynamic and able to update it. So that was really useful, actually, going through that process. And I found this particular SUM-IF function can be useful for lots of different things, whether you're making a dashboard, whether you just want to quickly marry up lots of data together. There are other ways of doing that, but this is a very quick, hacky way of doing that simply. So basically, that's it. That's how I sort of got all that data together and brought it into one place. So now, once we've got that, we could then hand over, and I was sharing it with Alex and Catherine to make sure they not only understood the data, but they were happy with what it all meant, and then we had the right ranges and so on. But once we'd gone through that process, we then needed to go to the blog review. Now, I obviously had some key ideas about how I wanted this to take place from my point of view and some key actions. And actually, let me go back to this particular view here. And so what I did, just to help Catherine look through this list is I put some automatic formatting onto the cells. And I basically said that if the users or impressions are above a certain amount, then I want to color it green because I feel that's positive. And if they're below a certain amount, I want to color that red. And that just helped me and Catherine have a look and quickly identify the sort of top performers and the low performers, so we could sort of weed through things pretty quickly. I've actually got a list here. Yeah, so the low performers had fewer than 10 visits, or 10 or fewer visits, or less than 10 visits, sorry. Start with those first because we want to weed out those, thin those out, and then tackle the pages that had more than 50 unique visits because they're really important to do, and then work on the ones in between. So now I'm going to hand over to Catherine. So maybe if you can come back on, Catherine, and I'd like you just to talk about your process. Going through the blog review, you're actually working with Esme, Alex's daughter, and that was quite useful in and of itself. You might want to mention why that was useful. So Jess, talk us through from the beginning of your process.
Yeah, so we got this spreadsheet, and the first action was to ask Esme to take a look at the spreadsheet and take a look at all of the blogs that were on the site, because Alex and I are really close to these blogs. They're all Alex's ideas. I've written all of them pretty much. So we were kind of, even though some of them were old, we were pretty close to all of them. So it was really helpful to have Esme take a closer look and say, actually, these blogs are really great. There are some broken images or some links that aren't working on these blogs. And these are blogs that seem to duplicate a lot of content. Could we look to blend them together and create one better blog post? So she went through and looked at all of the blogs, which is a fantastic task. And she made a note. So she supplemented Ben's spreadsheet saying, this blog post is fine. This blog post needs to be removed, deleted. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Shared that spreadsheet there. And these are the ones where I suggest that you combine them into one bigger blog post. So the first action for me, when it got to me, was I like to do the easy stuff first. So the first thing I did was go through and delete all of the ones that were getting so few views it wasn't worth keeping them. So that was the easy fix. Then I went through and did all of the fixes, checking the images, checking that the links all still worked. And then it was kind of the main task of the activity. So that was looking at the blog posts and combining them where they needed to be combined. I think a couple of the blog posts were a really straightforward process. We'd written an ebook and we'd split the ebook out into 4 or 5 different blog posts and put those up onto the website. So combining them was simply a matter of stitching them back together again, and it was simply a copy and paste job. First blog, second blog, third blog, fourth blog. The result, one great blog that really covers a subject in a lot of depth and is really useful for people. There was one blog that we worked on. There were 2 blogs that we worked on. They covered a similar sort of subject. They were on moving and extend, whether it was better to move or extend. And there was also, if you were to extend your house, would it be worth it? Would it add value to your house in the long term? Now, Esme had quite rightly pointed out that they could probably be combined. When I took a closer look at that, this is where kind of my extra knowledge came in. I remembered the first time we'd covered the subject, and I remembered the second time. And Alex's thinking had essentially evolved over the time. So the first blog was a kind of simplistic take on the more detailed second blog. So combining them didn't make sense because it was kind of 2 different eras of thinking. But Esme had also pointed out that one of the blogs was still clearly a work in progress because it was a bit convoluted and hard to follow. And reading back, it absolutely was. it probably made perfect sense to Alex and I at the time, but it was kind of quite hard to follow his thinking through the blog post. So there was definitely work to be done. The solution, to my mind, was to kind of separate out the 2 topics, and there's 2 different subjects that you can cover from Alex's point of view. The first is, if you build a home extension, is it going to be worth it? And the other one is whether you should move or extend, which is a lot. There's the financial aspect to take into account, but there's also lots of other things that you should be thinking about as well. So the rather than combining 2 blog posts into one, we actually kept 2 blog posts, but we covered 2 completely different topics, whether you should move or extend, and whether if you did a home extension, it'd be worth it. And so that created 2 blog posts that were really useful, but also not confusing. It didn't try to cover too wide-ranging a topic in a few hundred words. The other blog post that we particularly worked on was the one that had got the top number of views that you could probably see from Ben's spreadsheet. It was the one on barn conversions. So if you ask about how to get a planning permission for a barn conversion, Alex's blog comes out pretty much top in Google. So it's a really heavily searched and read article, as you can see from the stats. It was also quite old, and some of the planning legislation had evolved. So we thought this is a good opportunity to create a kind of a super blog post, a cornerstone piece of content that would absolutely show the value of what Alex delivers in the work that he does and the thinking that he goes into. So I revisited this blog post in more depth. I added more information from a couple of other blog posts that covered the subject from a different angle. And I also conducted an interview with a planning consultant that Alex works with to make sure that we were absolutely covering the latest thinking on the subject, and then created a super blog post, which is about 2,000 words. So it's a pretty hefty read. But if you're thinking about undertaking a barn conversion, it's kind of the first thing you need to be thinking about. It's the planning permission. So if it's something you're interested in, it's something that you're going to find really useful. So it's a really valuable piece of content to you. So it was worthwhile putting that effort in to do that. So that was my activity on the blog posts. Looking back at my files, I started it in September 2019 and finished the barn conversion blog, which was the last thing, in January this year. But that makes it sound like it was a massive undertaking, and it really wasn't. And looking back at it, I think I probably spent 3 or 4 days in total. It was working on it, and a kind of a day a month essentially, and that was a kind of manageable amount of time for everybody involved in saying we're going to put in some serious thinking and action on this and get it done. So a long time frame, but actually a relatively short amount of time involved in it.
The time frame from a search optimization point of view is better as well. So not making a wholesale change to the site really quickly is probably better than not better than the way you did it, which is just slowly. Really, you get rid of the stuff that's really not impacting the site anyway, and then start working on the others. So it feels more natural, at least in terms of how you're doing it. Can I just ask you? Obviously, moving through and doing the easy things first. Looking, can you delete an item and redirect it? Can you go through and fix various bits? I know over time links break or they change. Or you may say, actually, that post that needs to link through to a more relevant article for that we've produced. But the more tricky bits comes when you're combining things together. So talk through that process. How did you go about deciding which one should be combined, and then actually bringing them all together?
So Esme had made her suggestions, which I agreed with absolutely. So the way I did it, I would read each blog post and get an idea of what it covered. Then I would jot down and summarize the points covered in each of the blog posts. And then I would essentially combine those summaries into one new blog post that kind of touched on all of the points from both blogs. And then just kind of sense check that and make sure it made a kind of useful and sensible and well-ordered blog post. And then I would take the content of each blog and put it into Word, and then essentially copy and paste paragraphs from each blog into a new document to create a new blog. And in each case, once I'd copied a paragraph, I would change the font color so I knew that I'd included the idea in the new blog post. And then so once I knew that I'd included all of the points from both blog posts that I was going to include in the new blog post, I would go away and leave it for a bit to make sure that I wasn't making the mistake of knowing what I wanted to say and the points I wanted to make, but not actually making them clearly. So
I think that's a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah.
Just giving it some breathing space. so that you come back at it with fresh eyes. Your brain maybe has worked through it as well, and you look at it and go, "Nah, I'm not making sense here," or actually, that was really good.
Yeah, and often it's the kind of, I know what you were trying to say there, but actually you completely failed. So it's just making sure that giving it that time, as you say, to kind of breathe and come back to it with fresh eyes, and give it a read for sense and smooth it out and edit it, and making sure that it all, you kind of can't see the joins from the old blog post. It's created a blog post that flows naturally and is clearly feels right and it reads well. So yes, and then I would submit it to Alex for his approval before I published it.
Yeah, great. I mean, that starts to be quite a considerable bit of work when you're doing that, but there's certainly no, it can be worthwhile, particularly if they're valuable pieces and they're getting a lot of traffic. Yeah. Also, we talked about updating blogs or blog posts. Actually, a lot of people might think that, and it depends on how you look at a blog, but a blog is a strict timeline where you post something and it must stay there. And then if you need to post something new, you have to post a new blog post later. And you know, I think I used to think like that. I used to think, well, it is a historic record of events, almost like a Twitter or social timeline. But it depends on the purpose. If your purpose is to create that and show your changing thinking over a period of time, maybe it's a more personal blog, or it is specifically a blog as opposed to a company website, then that might be true. But I think with this, the whole purpose is to drive traffic to the website, or encourage traffic to the website, or encourage linking, as well as being useful materials for Alex. So actually, there's nothing wrong if you have an older post, just taking that older post and rewriting it, improving upon it, maybe putting that it's been updated. Certainly if facts have changed, maybe if you've got something wrong, maybe you can state, yeah, this was wrong, actually we've updated it to this. And then actually updating the blog post date so it becomes one of the newer blog posts as if you just published it now. Because then you are keeping that one content piece updated with relevant information. A lot of people do this with, you know, they're cornerstone pieces. They can just keep them up to date rather than adding to them. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and actually it can work quite well. And it can stop you having such of a nightmare when you come to reviewing your blog posts, because you won't have lots of different bits of the same content or similar content throughout. You've got this one piece that you're continuing to update. Were there any other challenges throughout doing it that you came across that would be worth sharing with people? Anything in particular?
I can't think of anything. For me, it was a really useful thing to do. Actually, I really enjoyed it, having that opportunity to, because, you know, my work evolves as well. And so it was really nice to go back to some of those older blog posts and think, actually, I wouldn't write that for Alex in that way any longer. So I found it a really useful exercise in terms of saying, this is a really great opportunity to go back and make your work even better. And so I found it a really enjoyable thing to do. And yeah, it's a valuable exercise to undertake.
It was, yeah, definitely. And I think having that external influence from Esme, who understands, because she managed a lot of the social media for Communion, so she understands what the purpose is, and she understands where the mission of the company and where they're driving to, and what the sort of idea is. So actually having that third party, I think that was valuable, and also it didn't involve Alex, who'd be able to help you, but he is too invested in it. Also very busy, but he's too invested in it. So actually having Esme gives that complete sort of rethinking of it. And I did bring it up quickly, but I'll show it again. So this is where Esme took the sheet I'd created and then used it as a base for basically managing this particular project, because it's a lot of detail here. And adding lots of notes in. I do like the column keep, dump, combine. I love that, nice and simple. I think, you know, this process can be quite cathartic in a way, can be quite liberating. It's a bit like going through your house and saying, like doing the Mary Kondo, do I love this? Does it give me joy? And I think you can do something very similar with each post. You say, is this useful to people? To someone? It doesn't have to be useful to you, but is it useful to a client? Is it useful to my colleagues? Is it useful to, you know, whoever? And I think that's really nice. Actually, once you go through this process, you can fall back in love with your website again. Maybe if you're falling out of love with it, you feel there's a lot of dreary content on that. You might find some real gems that you wrote, and you may want to bring those, refresh them forward, do a sort of a retrospective on some of the things that you did. Maybe I know we've got a lot of our events we used to share on our blog, and it's quite fun maybe to look back on the past 10 years. So having that content is really useful to be able to bring in. So it can be valuable, even if it's not inherently valuable from a search engine point of view.
And just a really nice reminder of how much work you put into it, and say, actually, look at all of these things that we've worked on. And, it's an impressive body of work when you actually take a step back and say, yeah, we've had lots of things to say over the years.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't need to rush it. I think that's the important thing here is, yes, you want to pull the data together fairly quickly, so you've got a snapshot of where the site is, but it doesn't need to be done quickly. It can be something, if you're going to do it yourself, just do it in bite-sized chunks, really, and take the worst ones first, the best ones next, and then start sorting out the middle ones. I mean, I've gone through this process, and I've still got more to do in terms of combining articles together and sort of rewriting, but it's nice to have... it's good to have that base to work from. And if it takes 6 months, you might need to do another snapshot and sort of see how things are. So yes, they're really useful. So let's just go through. I put a little checklist together that people might find useful here in terms of going through this process. Catherine, let me know if there's anything else you want to add. But essentially, can you get rid of it? Can you dump it, basically? And if you do dump it, make sure it's redirected. Either redirect it to something which it relates to, or redirect it back to the homepage of the blog.
Also, make sure, I can't, it's probably on there somewhere, make sure that you haven't linked that article from another page or another blog on the site, because I know that I fell down that hole. But
that's actually very easy to do so.
Yeah.
And what I'd recommend is, it's very important that you think about that, but I would do that at the end. So, which I'll talk about in a minute, actually. But yes, that's a really good point, actually. Can content be merged? Have a look, say, am I getting a feeling here that we've got a couple that are very easily merged? They can just the titles become headlines and they're pulled together. I know, actually, Catherine, you've written a few articles for us, which you had split over two, because that seemed to be the right thing to do at the time. But actually, it came to the point where they'd be better as one article. So pulling them together with multiple headings within actually worked better. And it's more useful to me, because if I want to share how to do some basic keyword research as one example, I can just send them one link, and it's much easier.
It's really interesting the way blog posts have changed over the years. And a few years ago, it was actually keep it to a couple of hundred words, a few hundred words. That's all anybody be interested in. To now, we're thinking, actually, a blog post of 2,000 words, if it covers it in detail and is interesting and useful, then absolutely go for it. That's what people want to read.
Yes. Should it be split up or extended? I mean, maybe you've got a very long article, and it might be better because maybe there's a tangent it goes off, and it might be better that some of that tangent is moved into another article. It depends. Or extended even. Sometimes it's really nice to look at an article. This is great, but I've got so much more to say now, to add. Maybe you've done a load more videos, images. Can you add all of that media into blog posts? That's going to really help as well. Certainly, I've found that over the years that we've produced videos that could become relevant. So actually, I can go back into old blog posts and either embed those videos or link through to new things that we produced. So that old content, if it's getting a lot of traffic, can then link through to new places, maybe through to landing pages as well, making sure. That's one really important, is maybe in the older days we hadn't been encouraging everyone to link through to landing pages to sort of really create a sort of hub and spoke approach, having your landing page in the middle with all of these supporting blog posts around it. Well, now's the opportunity to do that. And are there any content gaps? I think that can be quite core as well, because you spending the time to go through this, you may identify areas where, we're not really talking about this enough, and we're missing this whole completely. But actually, I can see that people are interested in it, but we haven't got much on it. And so it can really help with identifying that. So just tidying up this whole process. Once we came to the end of it, it kind of hands back to me. So Catherine and Esme have done the bulk of the hard work, really, sort of doing all of this. And then it comes upon me just to check it from a technical point of view. I can sort of use my Site Spider. We've got, I think it was Site Sucker. No, not Site Sucker. Site Spider, it was called at the time, which sort of goes through and audits all of that. I've got a better one now. It's called Site Bulb, which allows you to sort of spider all the pages of a site. And for me, I just wanted to make sure there were no missing pages, number one. So everything had been redirected there. Also looking through and comparing against pages in Google Search Console and Google Analytics, and again doing a check against them to make sure that even though the pages weren't missing on the site, there may be old links out there. We need to make sure they're redirected. So that was number one. And then this comes back to what you were saying before, making sure that we haven't got any blog posts which are linking to other blog posts that are now redirected to somewhere else. Very easy, because they don't show up as missing pages, because they're redirected pages because you've moved that blog post somewhere else. So this audit actually picks up on those. And then I could give that list to Catherine or Esme, and they can go through and just recorrect all the links. And it's not that it's a problem. If people come across and click on the link, it's going to bounce to the old link and then go to the new one. So it's not inherently an issue, but just from a search point of view, we want that all neatly tidied up and everything just pointing to where it needs to go to. So I think that's quite valuable, that process at the end, just going through and just making sure that everything's done, everything's tidied away, and we've got no holes, which is really important. And yeah, at this point in the process, just making sure and rounding up any of those content ideas. If you came up with any ideas that need to be written about, this is an excellent opportunity to note all those down and take them forward into the next round of blog reviewing. I don't know if you came out with any of those from Alex's point of view.
No, I think we've come up with some more recently, actually, saying, yeah, here are some gaps that we need to fill in. Yes.
Good. Okay, so just the results. So a lot of work's gone into this at some expense, having to work with different people. There's costs involved, time from all involved. So it's got to be worth doing. Unfortunately, it's quite difficult to tell because of lockdown has kind of affected a lot of traffic. So it's really difficult to tell cleanly that things have improved. But let me just have a quick look. So this is overlaying two graphs. We've got the top graph, which is Google Search Console, looking back from the end of April in 2019 all the way through to end of last week, I think. And then comparing that with the graph below, which is the same period from Google Analytics. Let me see if I can remember rightly. Light blue are clicks, the purple are number of impressions, and the orange is the average search position or position in search. So what we can see is basically, and it's difficult to know when the content was updated. I've got big arrow saying it was updated here, but it's spread over a period of time, so we're not sure. But I think you can tell, because normally when Google is spidering a site and you're getting significant changes, you're going to get your position moving quite wildly until it settles down again, because Google's got to find the right place for your content and make sure that this new content actually is either, if you've redirected to a new page, it's the same value or same position that old page should be, or there's just a lot of work for Google to do. So you get some uncertain times while that's happening. So basically, you can kind of see where Catherine started working on and adapting the content. You can kind of see the website actually going a bit shaky at that time, and that's to be expected when you make any revisions, new site content. You're gonna get that. And then obviously it's Christmas, so things just tend to go down at Christmas anyway. And then afterwards, we actually just started to see an uptick in traffic, and then lockdown hit. Bang! You can see that the number of clicks going through. Or the number of impressions was still up, the number of clicks are going through. It's just going crazy at that point. So I'm assuming that's lockdown happening. But oddly, then things are starting to really pick up, and we're much higher than where we were in terms of search volume coming through. So more people are searching and coming up against Alex's site, but also more people are clicking through. Difficult to see from this graph, but maybe double, which is great. I mean, that's brilliant. What I can't take is whether the content review that I did with Catherine worked. It's really difficult to say. And ultimately, it was on such a broad array of topics and posts, it's difficult to say. But I know that, A, it's going to be easy to manage going forward because we've got fewer posts in there, and we can focus on just the ones that are better. But also, it's we can then, I think after lockdowns happen, we'll have things settle down and we can actually start looking at the search engine ranking position for some of those posts and see if they're doing better, see if they're improved. But I'm fairly confident that it's been quite helpful in terms of generating more content and keeping the site a lot cleaner. Just looking at the Google Analytics one, you can see that, loosely speaking, that the traffic through to the site has followed that same profile of clicks. You can see the blue lines loosely follow each other. So more traffic, a lot more traffic is coming through to the site on a daily basis. So something is definitely working. I'd like to think that it's in part due to the work of Catherine and Esme going through and sort of smoothing all that content, but we shall see. And definitely from practical speaking circumstances, a lot easier to manage going forward in terms of that. And actually, it brought out a lot of other things, like I showed you the blog example before, that we needed to bring out more categories to show those on the blog homepage. And I think it's actually spurred a lot of new ideas, that whole process as well. So I'm fairly confident it's worked. It's just difficult to see from these particular graphs, but interesting to look at nonetheless. Thanks very much for that, Catherine. I think it's really good to go through that process, and I hope that other people sort of take that as a seed, as an idea, that even if you're going to do it yourself, and it's quite a hard task but worth doing, that you sort of get on that train and start. If you need some help, then obviously we can help in different ways. Yeah. Catherine certainly is very good at going through and sorting through all of this content.
My own site's been on my to-do list for for weeks, but it's my intention to do that.
It's something when because we did work on getting the same for your site. I actually really enjoy it though. When I have the time, it is a nicer process to look through and say, how can I make this better? It's actually really nice. So this is the time when I ask people to commit to an action. So maybe Catherine,
we know what mine should be.
Go on to your own. I know that actually I've got a couple of old posts that I've been meaning. I've already worked out what I need to do and how am I going to merge them together. I've actually done all the hard work. I just need to pull them together now. So yeah, that's something I need to do. I will try and do that. May not be in the next 30 days. So let's have a look here. What else we've got? So yeah, Q&A. We've actually got a little bit of time if anyone's got any questions. I don't know who. We've had a few people in and out today. Who we've got? Nikki. I think Nikki, may have gone through that process with you a little bit in terms of content consolidation, but I can't remember if we went through it in such a formulaic way. Might be something to approach and look at. Although I know you've got a lot of other projects on at the moment, so maybe not right now. So let me just, I don't think we'll have any questions, but I'll just move on to this. Yeah, the next topic. So I'm going to hopefully have Jack McCautry. And we are going to be looking at, and then this was actually suggested by Nikki from Eclipse, the topic of mining LinkedIn to find prospects. So this isn't about just getting a data dump and putting it into your email list necessarily. This is a bit more intelligent than that. This is trying to find people who would be good to work with, and then sort of communicating with them in such a way that that they become aware of you a bit more. So not necessarily using it to generate leads, but using the power of LinkedIn and the sort of global directory that is LinkedIn to get more people to become aware of you. And I know Jack's been doing this certainly with a client that we work on together called Whitley Jones. So he's sort of working on their behalf to do this. So I think this could be a really interesting one, as well as some tips on how to engage with them and sort of start that conversation, which can be quite difficult. So that one's for you, Nikki. We'll get that sorted for next time. It would actually be good, Catherine. I won't get you to commit anything now, but maybe we could talk about. I don't think I've looked at anything to do with specifically blog writing in and of itself. I've looked at some strategies from like an SEO point of view, but it might be good to in the future look at like how to do copywriting, how to approach that. So I'll talk to you offline about that. If people have any friends who would be interested in the club, there is a free version which they can go and join. Go to our website, ratherthaninventive.com/club. Free to join for the podcast and the newsletter there, so they'll get a taste of the club, including actually some of the extra interviews we've done. We're sort of rerunning them again from the Something Inventive podcast, but they can upgrade to Pro to get this, all the other marketing, video, and web webinars we've done. And it's £25 a month. There is a cheaper version if they buy it up front. And if you send them my way, I might be able to give them a special discount. But there's no commitment at all, so they can cancel at any time on that. Great. So let's keep in touch. Best place to get hold of you, Catherine? Where should people go if they're interested in talking to you?
LinkedIn's probably the best place to go. I'm on LinkedIn as Catherine Every if you search for me there, or my website is hellopippin.co.uk.
Yeah, go and check out Catherine's stuff. I know you've got some courses as well.
Yes, I've got 3 copywriting courses which I made free at the start of lockdown. So if you fancy improving writing,
go and grab them. Yeah, excellent. You can connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn as well. The next club session, hopefully, although I keep changing the dates because I keep going on holiday. I'm no more holidays apart from that's done now. The next club session, all being well, should be on the 20. That's spelled wrong. It's 22nd of September, the 22nd of September at 1 p.m. So be around for that. And that's when I'm talking about Jack McCautry, talking about LinkedIn and finding prospects on that. Thank you very much, Catherine. Really good to have you. Hopefully have you again for another one at some point. Thanks for everyone who sort of popped in. Thanks, Nikki. And we'll see you next time in September.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Goodbye.